Hi, my name's Joel Pringle. I'm an advocacy campaigner on the Every Age Counts campaign to end ageism. I'm joined by Marlene, Dr. Marlene Krasovitsky, Director and Co-Chair of the Every Age Counts campaign, and we're going to have a discussion about how we campaign to end ageism at Every Age Counts. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm joining you, the lands of the Awabakal people, and this was land that was never ceded, never sold, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Marlene, thank you for joining us for this chat. Before we start, what can you tell me, what is Every Age Counts?
Thanks, Joel. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Every Age Counts is a national coalition of organisations and a grassroots campaign of individuals dedicated to ending ageism experienced by older people and building an Australia that no longer tolerates it. Our goal is to set strong foundations for current and future generations to age well, and that means ending ageism. Our vision is a society where every person is valued, connected, and respected, regardless of age. Now, our overarching strategy is to work on two fronts. Firstly, to change social norms and attitudes, but also to challenge structural barriers. Working on these dual strategies is critical because they're both prerequisites to success for the other. Action in each reinforces change in the other. So we address both social attitudes and norms, so how we think, act and feel about getting older and older people, and structural barriers that are underpinned by ageism, for instance in work, in aged care, health, income security and so on. We launched back in October 2018 with a strong foundation of 20 organisational members, including our National Human Rights Institution, consumer and representative advocacy peaks for older people, service providers, think tanks, unions, research organisations and so on. Today, in March 2022, I'm happy to say we have over 80 organisational members as well as many thousands of individual supporters. Our membership base is diverse and we're backed by all of the major national organisations working in support of older Australians. And importantly, we enjoy, because we've worked so very hard to secure, cross-party political support and the support of independent members of Parliament. This is really critical because ageism is not a partisan issue. We are not party political.
Thanks, Marlene. Can you outline for us what are the tools and approaches that have been most successful in involving people at the grassroots level? For example, how do we get people involved in conversations, for example, newcomers, how do we raise awareness about the issues?
Thanks, Joel. Yes, look, I'd like to approach the questions in two ways, if I may, by outlining principles and tactics. The principles that form the basis upon which we develop our practices, and then I'll give some examples of the tactics we use. I'm hoping those principles will resonate with others because others will no doubt employ their own tactics and strategies. So let me begin with 5 key principles that underpin our work. Principle 1, know where people are at and start there. We started with what we knew about people's attitudes to ageing and older people with our foundational research, The Drivers of Ageism, and it gave us a very clear sense of community attitudes, and that formed the basis for our theory of change. We also did some community segmentation research, which gave us insight about where people were at and what they needed, and that continues today to shape our targeting and our strategies. The second principle is that we are a coalition, so building trust and working with and through our members and supporters is key. Our members have members and we try to work with and through them. We're a tiny group of workers, so we try to produce messaging, resources, content for our members to use and our supporters to use. Everything that we do is out there to be picked up used, co-branded, and made relevant to other people's contexts. The third principle, this is not about one thing. Ending ageism is a multifaceted and long-term campaign. We're here for the long haul. Our initial planning horizon is 10 to 15 years. And so we do lots of different things: research, advocacy, policy development, grassroots engagement and activation. And we work across a lot of different sectors: aged care, housing, health, work, human rights. But our actions across these need to wrap each other. If we develop a human rights policy, for instance, we engage people in the process. We launch it publicly, including in the media. We build messaging around it for our members and supporters to use, and we engage politically on the issue, and so on. The fourth principle is that things change over time. We're still in our very early days, and our early focus has been on two things: building our infrastructure, which is our base, our identity, our coalition, our supporters, our policy, our research. And secondly, building awareness, because that's what the research told us was where we needed to start. Now, we've come a long way in that journey now, although there's still much to be done. But now we're in a stronger position to turn to mobilisation and activation as well. The fifth thing, very quickly, is you can't always anticipate your opportunities, but they will present themselves. Every year we go through an elaborate monitoring and evaluation process, and we plan the year ahead. I guess we've learned now that we can anticipate about 50% of the possibilities that will present themselves. So for instance, as an example, we knew that the World Health Organization was launching their first global report on ageism, so we could build some strategies and activity around that. But we didn't know, for instance, that a few years ago, the government would announce a Royal Commission into aged care, which was a really critical opportunity for us. So there is a need to be flexible. So now that I've gone through the principles, can I go back to your question in terms of the engagement and awareness that drop out of those 5 principles for us and the tools that we use? So for us, they're things like start with a simple ask. For us, that is to take the pledge to end ageism. Once people are signed up, they go onto our database, which opens up the possibility for an ongoing conversation. And develop clear engagement pathways. Okay, so they've signed up. What happens next? There has to be a pathway of engagement and inclusion into the work of the campaign. Being present and visible. We try as much as we can to be at events, at fairs, at expos, at conferences, at gatherings, to try and be a visible presence and to talk with people. And of course, I said before, working with and through our members to reach their members. Personal connection really matters. If you can be introduced to us by someone or an organisation that you trust, that works really well. We train our advocates. This is about providing training and support for the people who want to engage with us more deeply and give people the skills and language and the networks to end ageism. Of course, mainstream and social media are really critical tools, consistent and relentless messaging using whatever platforms you can access. And of course, the development of resources like conversation starters, our Am I Ageist quiz, collateral for events that can be repurposed by others. So that's a sense of the sorts of tools we use to engage.
Following on from that, from what's been learned on the EveryAGE Counts campaign, what is necessary to prompt people to take action and to join the campaign?
Campaigning is essentially about 2 things: awareness and action. As we know, ageism wears many, many faces, and of course we've all internalised it. It's built into our very systems, our language in such a deep and indelible way that we don't notice it. It's so invisible and highly tolerated that we need to begin by building awareness. So of course, the answer to your question is to give people a way to recognise ageism, to name it, to know it, and the tools to challenge it and end it, and to understand the impacts of ageism in their context. And that may be in aged care, in a health setting, in work, and so on. What does it look like in your context? So build the awareness in the context that has meaning for people. Otherwise, it can be a relatively esoteric concept. But being aware doesn't necessarily mean knowing what to do about it. So we try to build resources and supports for things people can do as an individual, but also within their context, so that we can deal with the issue systemically. So for instance, in the workplace. The principles behind those sorts of tactics are, firstly, make it relevant and draw the linkages for people. Reframe what so many people are experiencing as not just their individual experience or just the way it is. It goes way beyond an individual experience. Ageism is systemic. So give people the tools to question it, to challenge it, and give people a different frame and different language to use. This is hard. These conversations are hard, and a one-off won't fix it. Make it as easy as possible for people to engage in the work of the campaign. So like I said before, it's a clear and a simple ask. Take the pledge. That's the first thing we ask people to do. And maybe give people a thing to do, to organise an event. And again, make it as simple as possible. And that was the thinking we brought into our first Ageism Awareness Day. We built a lot of resources around that, but we tried to make it very simple. Just log on to the event. And of course, provide engaging evidence-based resources for people to use, for people to watch, to disseminate, to discuss. Become a trusted voice, build a trusted profile. If you can become the go-to on ageism, that's a wonderful goal. And importantly, build and nurture your alliances and your supporters. Keep them engaged in doing meaningful things that they co-create with you and value their support and input.
Tell me, what have been the experiences of securing media attention for Every Age Counts, and how important has media attention been to achieving the campaign objectives?
So the principle here is that if you want to change attitudes and norms, media attention is critical. We know the media powerfully influences negative perceptions of older people, whether it's because older people are underrepresented, whether invisible, or often poorly portrayed. Recurring stereotypes include images of older people as lonely, isolated victims, unhealthy, pitiable, the list goes on, or just one homogenous clump. So media is a powerful way to cut through and draw attention, as is well-known trusted influencers, champions, ambassadors, if you can. So the sorts of tactics that we use is to connect to high-profile people who have a personal connection to the issue. This worked for us, for instance, in having a well-known ambassador for our first Ageism Awareness Day. Her personal story became a magnet for media and made the front page of our national newspaper. As a result of our first Ageism Awareness Day, ageism appeared in the Australian media for the most times ever. Secondly, create new bits of information in the format that media wants. And we found that polling is a successful tool for this. A series of questions that are put to the community and you get some data back from that. And there are agencies specifically set up to do this, and this can be great value for money. The point here is to create media interest that you can hang your story off. Otherwise, you, like me, may spend a lot of time writing what we consider to be worthy pieces and letters, only to be ignored by newsrooms and journalists. In our early stages of the campaign, communications meant primarily marketing, building our brand, our logo, our visual identity, and our messaging. This is critical for building our infrastructure, and of course it continues to be work that we undertake. But now our comms focus is firmly on media, and we are developing really good relationships with key journalists and newsrooms who get us and our story and our issues so that we can now have ongoing conversations. We've also insourced mainstream and social media experts who are well versed in social justice campaigning. Now, this was a strategic choice in terms of how we could spend our meagre budget. This expertise and their connections don't come cheap, but none of us in the team have it. This has been a key strategy in bringing new people to Every Age Counts and in building our social movement.
Thanks, Marlene. What an insight into the breadth and depth of campaigning in such a complex area. Where can people find out more about the Every Age Counts campaign?
Thank you, Joel. And of course, you've been a key part of this as well, so I'd like to acknowledge you. We'd be delighted if people would go to our website at everyagecounts.org.au. All of our materials are there. And we would also warmly welcome people getting in touch with us through our info@everyagecounts.org.au portal. We'd love to have a conversation. And thank you very much for the chance to speak about what we've learned about campaigning against ageism.